The air in the congressional chamber crackled with unease, like a storm about to break. Rows of polished wooden desks gleamed under harsh lights, but the mood was anything but civil. Lawmakers shifted in their seats, papers rustling, as the debate over a veterans' health care bill turned venomous. The bill, meant to fund hospitals for retired soldiers, had split the room. Jasmine Crockett, a fierce advocate for the measure, stood at her podium, her voice steady but her eyes blazing. She'd spent months crafting a plan to pour millions into underfunded clinics, ensuring no veteran would wait months for a doctor's visit. Across the aisle, Jim Jordan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, a smirk curling his lips. He'd made it clear he thought the bill was a waste, bloated with what he called reckless spending. Crockett gripped her notes, her knuckles pale. She spoke of soldiers returning home, broken by war, only to find empty promises and crumbling hospitals. Her words carried weight, each syllable a plea for those who'd served. She proposed redirecting funds from unused defense contracts to cover the costs, a move she'd researched for weeks. The chamber murmured, some nodding, others scribbling notes. But Jordan's smirk widened, his gaze locked on her like a predator, sizing up prey. He'd been waiting for this moment, ready to tear her plan apart. As Crockett paused to sip water, Jordan shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. The room hushed. He didn't bother with pleasantries, his voice booming, sharp, as a blade. He called her proposal a pipe dream, a fantasy cooked up by someone who didn't understand budgets. He mocked her research, saying she'd probably read it off the back of a cereal box. Laughter rippled through his allies, their chuckles like darts aimed at Crockett. He paced, jabbing a finger toward her, claiming her plan would bankrupt the nation while doing nothing for veterans. His words dripped with scorn, each one meant to humiliate. He leaned forward, eyes glinting, and sneered that she was out of her depth, a rookie playing at lawmaking. The chamber tensed, lawmakers exchanging glances. Crockett's face tightened, her jaw set, but she didn't flinch. Jordan's attack wasn't just about the bill. It was personal, a calculated strike to undermine her in front of everyone. He kept going, his voice rising, accusing her of grandstanding for votes while ignoring real solutions. He waved a hand dismissively, saying, her ideas were better suited for a school project than Congress. The laughter grew louder, his supporters egging him on. A few of Crockett's allies shifted uncomfortably, their silence deafening. But Crockett didn't shrink. She set her glass down, the clink echoing in the sudden quiet. Her eyes locked onto Jordan's, unyielding, like steel meeting fire. She stepped closer to the podium, her posture rigid, every inch of her radiating defiance. The room held its breath, sensing a shift. Jordan's smirk faltered just for a moment, as Crockett's lips parted to speak. Her voice, when it came, was low, deliberate, cutting through the tension like a knife. She wasn't about to let his mockery stand. Not today, not in this fight for those who'd sacrificed everything. Jasmine Crockett's voice sliced through the congressional chamber, each word precise, like a surgeon's scalpel. She stood tall, at her podium, eyes locked on Jim Jordan, who lingered near his desk, his smirk now a thin, brittle line. The room, still buzzing from his vicious mockery of her veterans' health care bill, fell silent, every ear straining to catch her response. Crockett didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her tone was ice-cold, laced with a fury that made the air feel heavy. She began by addressing Jordan directly, calling him out for dismissing a plan that could save lives. She held up a single sheet of paper, her funding proposal, and asked if he'd even read it before tearing it apart. Jordan shifted, his face reddening, but Crockett didn't pause. She laid out the numbers, clear and simple. Her bill redirected funds from expired defense contracts, money already allocated but sitting unused. She explained how those dollars could hire doctors, rebuild clinics, and cut wait times for veterans struggling with injuries from wars Jordan had voted to fund. Her voice grew sharper as she pivoted, turning Jordan's attack on its head. She asked why he was so quick to call her plan reckless when he'd supported budgets that left veterans' hospitals understaffed for years. The chamber stirred. Lawmakers. Glancing at Jordan, whose eyes narrowed, Crockett pressed on, her words relentless. She pulled out another document, this one a record of Jordan's votes against veteran funding increases over the past decade. She read the dates and amounts aloud, each one landing like a blow. The room gasped softly, the weight of her evidence sinking in. She accused Jordan of caring more about scoring points than helping those who'd served. Her allies, seated nearby, began to nod, their faces hardening with approval. A few clapped, the sound sharp in the quiet, emboldening her. Jordan couldn't stay silent. He lunged forward, cutting her off, his voice a harsh bark. He called her a liar, claiming she was twisting his record to play the hero. He leaned over his desk, fists clenched, and shouted that her bill was a handout dressed up as charity, a scam to buy votes. His words were raw, meant to wound, but they lacked the precision of Crockett's. He pointed at her, his finger trembling, and said she had no business lecturing him on veterans when she'd never served. The jab was personal, cruel, and his supporters roared with approval, their cheers a wall of noise. But Crockett didn't waver. She stepped around her podium, closing the distance between them, her gaze unyielding. She spoke over the cheers, her voice rising just enough to carry. She said she didn't need to wear a uniform to know right from wrong, and she wouldn't let Jordan hide behind his bluster. She pointed out that veterans in his own district had written her, begging for the bill to pass because their local clinics were falling apart. The chamber hushed again, her words striking a chord. Her allies stood now, some calling out in support, their voices a growing chorus. Jordan's smirk was gone, replaced by a scowl, his hands twitching at his sides. He opened his mouth to retort, but Crockett wasn't done, and the room was no longer his. The tide was turning and he could feel it. The congressional chamber pulsed with raw energy, every eye fixed on Jasmine Crockett as she stood at the center of the storm. The air felt thick, charged with the weight of her words and the growing support of her allies, who now leaned forward, their faces set with resolve. Jim Jordan, his scowl deepening, gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. The tide had shifted against him, and he knew it, but Crockett wasn't finished. She took a slow breath, her voice dropping to a tone that was both soft and searing, commanding the room's attention. She began to tell a story, one she hadn't planned to share, about a veteran she'd met in her district. His name was Thomas, a man who'd served 2 tours overseas, only to come home to a hospital that couldn't afford enough nurses. Crockett described his shaking hands, his quiet voice as he told her about waiting 6 months for surgery, his savings drained by medical bills. She spoke of his pride, how he'd refused charity but begged for a system that worked. Her words painted a vivid picture, each detail striking the lawmakers like a hammer. She looked directly at Jordan, her gaze unflinching, and asked how he could call her bill reckless when men like Thomas were paying the price for his votes. The chamber was silent, the weight of her story sinking in. Even Jordan's supporters shifted uncomfortably, their earlier cheers now a distant memory. Crockett's allies erupted in applause, the sound rolling through the room like thunder. Lawmakers who'd been neutral began to nod, their expressions grim. Crockett stood taller, her voice steady as she tied Thomas's story to her bill, explaining how it would hire more nurses, fund surgeries, and rebuild trust with those who'd served. She accused Jordan of turning his back on veterans like Thomas, not with anger, but with a quiet conviction that cut deeper than any shout. The room was hers now, the momentum unstoppable. Jordan couldn't take it. He sprang up, his face twisted with fury, his voice a jagged roar. He pointed at Crockett, spitting out that she was using sob stories to dodge real debate. His words were venomous, personal, as he accused her of faking tears to manipulate the room, calling her a fraud who'd never cared about veterans until it suited her. The attack was cruel, meant to shatter her credibility. But it was a misstep. Gasps rippled through the chamber. Some of Jordan's own allies winced, their heads turning away. A senior lawmaker known for his neutrality shook his head, muttering under his breath. The room's mood soured against Jordan, his desperation laid bare. Crockett didn't blink. She stepped forward, her eyes burning with a fire that silenced the murmurs. The chamber held its breath, sensing the moment had arrived for her to deliver the final blow. Her allies leaned in, their support a palpable force, while Jordan stood alone, his accusation hanging like a misfired arrow. Crockett's lips curved into a faint, steely jasmine. Crockett stood like a pillar in the congressional chamber, her faint smile sharp as a blade, her eyes locked on Jim Jordan. The room buzzed with anticipation, every lawmaker leaning forward, sensing the clash was about to end. Jordan's accusation, that she'd faked tears to manipulate them, hung in the air, but it was a crumbling wall, and Crockett was ready to bring it down. Her voice, when she spoke, was clear and steady, each word chosen to cut deep. She didn't raise her voice, but the chamber fell silent, as if the walls themselves were listening. She began by addressing Jordan's claim head-on. She said she didn't need to fake tears when veterans like Thomas were suffering because of choices Jordan had made. Her tone was firm, not angry, but laced with a moral weight that made lawmakers sit up straighter. She recounted the hours she'd spent meeting veterans, visiting clinics, and reading their letters, not for votes, but because she believed in their sacrifice. She turned Jordan's words against him, asking how he could accuse her of manipulation when he'd dodged every chance to fix the system. The question landed like a stone, heavy and undeniable. Crockett didn't stop there. She pointed to the bill on her podium, her voice rising just enough to carry to every corner. She said it wasn't a sob story, but a solution, one Jordan hadn't bothered to read because he was too busy mocking her. She listed the clinics it would save, the doctors it would hire, the lives it would change, her words painting a future where veterans weren't forgotten. Her allies pounded their desks, their cheers a growing wave. Even lawmakers who'd stayed quiet, their faces once unreadable now clapped, their hands joining the rhythm. A gray-haired senator, known for his skepticism, stood, his applause a signal that the room was hers. Jordan's face drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His hands, once clenched, fell limp at his sides. He tried to interrupt, his voice a weak rasp, accusing her of theatrics, but it was drowned out by the chamber's roar. His allies, once loud, sat silent, their eyes on the floor. Crockett didn't flinch. She stepped closer to the center, her gaze never leaving Jordan, and delivered her final blow. She said the real fraud was a lawmaker who'd rather tear down a plan than build one, who'd let veterans suffer to save face. The chamber exploded, cheers and applause shaking the walls. Jordan sank into his chair, his shoulders slumped, his smirk long gone. He looked small, diminished, a man out of moves. Crockett stood tall, her posture unbroken, her eyes sweeping the room. She nodded to her allies, then to the neutral lawmakers now on their feet, their support a testament to her victory. The bill wasn't passed yet, but the fight had shifted, and she'd won the day. The chamber's noise faded as she returned to her desk, her steps measured, her head high. The air, once thick with hostility, now carried a sense of justice, hard-earned and undeniable. Crockett had faced Jordan's mockery and turned it to dust, leaving no doubt who'd fought for the right cause.